The first two videos on this channel, many moons ago, covered the first two books in the Wheel of Time series, The Eye of the World and The Great Hunt. The Eye of the World video focused on the bizarrely laid out and structured climax, where characters leave and come back, move all over the place, don't ask the right questions and don't ask enough questions. And the Great Hunt video focused on how that entire book is essentially one long refusal of the call, a very brief and optional moment in story structure, normally resolved before the first act even ends, and is not something that can sustain an entire novel. I stand by everything I said in those two videos. I mean, the first one is terribly lit, and the second one has got terrible audio because I had the microphone the wrong way round, talking into it like this. Like, in my defense, it's a cylinder and this thing goes around the whole way. You'd think it could pick up sound from both sides. It cannot. But I do stand by everything I said. But, again, it was a while ago. A lot of time has passed since I read those two books. So what would happen if I tried to read the third book in the series, The Dragon Reborn, now? How lost would I be going into the next book years after reading the first two, without looking up any refreshers or summaries about where the characters are, or what world events have happened, or where the story stands? The Wheel of Time is, well, maybe not wholly original at first, deep, layered, and complex. There are dozens of primary characters, each with their own things going on. There are places and factions and races and magics happening all over the place. How well is that communicated? Does The Dragon Reborn explain itself well enough so that I'm not just flailing around in the dark? Is it possible to read the third book in a notoriously dense series years after the first two without getting completely lost? Well, that's what I read the book for, and because I want to see where the story goes, and why I'm making this video, to find out. First though, quick thoughts on the book, though this might end up being long thoughts on the book. Overall, I did not like the first two books in the series. They each had their moments, I cannot deny that, but altogether, for me, they were negative experiences. I like this one quite a bit more, for two reasons. One, all the characters have something worthwhile to do. Each of them has motion and momentum, and I don't just mean physical motion and momentum. There were stretches in the previous books where the characters were physically moving, but the plot itself had ground to a complete halt. Two characters running from evil villagers 4 times in a row, back to back to back, in the first book. And then a group of characters getting stuck in a weird parallel dimension for ages in the second book. And there is almost a stretch in this book where that happens, where we spend a little too long with 3 characters at this magical academy, but it moves away just as it starts to overstay its welcome. Everyone feels like they're doing something important nearly all of the time, and that is a pretty cool breath of fresh air. And the second reason I like this book a lot more than the first and second is that Rand is not in it much. Rand al'Thor is the chosen one and is essentially our protagonist. And he is a whiny, mopey charisma vacuum who sucks any and all life, maturity, and fun from every situation he is in. He is the dreaded combo of boring and annoying. So him not being in this all that much is certainly a good thing. Of the other characters that get more prominent focus, it's a mixed bag. 2 of them, Matt and Perrin, having their own unique magic powers developing, is a really cool way to keep them relevant and so the plot doesn't leave them behind. And I really like the sort of I've got problems of my own right now vibe I get from them in like the face of Rand's grand destiny. In fact, the first 100 or so pages are told exclusively from Perrin's point of view, and it is really quite good like that. It's streamlined and focused. I like Moraine, the wise guide of the group, not being in total control of everything anymore. And her bodyguard Lan is always cool with literally everything he does. Tom Merrilin, the sort of travelling entertainer, has always come across a little creepy to me. A bit lecherous and a bit unpleasant. A bit Master Roshi, but not like quite to that extent. And this, with the sort of unjustified air of superiority he has, means I don't particularly like the fact that he showed back up. And then we come to Egwene, Elaine, and Nynaeve. They are the 3 characters at the Magical Academy I mentioned earlier. And when the story is with them, it is at its weakest. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it comes dangerously close to tanking the pacing of everything when it's with them. And even though it doesn't, it's still not great. I mentioned in quite a few videos now that I think Nynaeve in the first book, The Eye of the World, is one of the worst fictional characters of all time. She is so foul and violent and rude and abrasive and just so aggro all of the time that it is exhausting to an unacceptable degree just experiencing her. She improves in the second book, and sadly she regresses here in the third. I cannot stand her. And Egwene and Elaine sort of putting up with her and just being near her elicits sympathy, which I don't think is the intended reaction. And then there's this just stark point where they all just start hating each other for no reason and being even ruder and snippier than usual. It's really not very nice to sit through. They're also involved in 2 truly bizarre scenes. The first involves the 3 young women walking through, I think it's a port, or it could be like a crowded town, where there's a lot of blokes. They get catcalled, which is nice, and Nynaeve slaps one of them. Egwene then thinks Nynaeve might have been pinched. And when I first read this, it didn't quite register in my brain. I was like, pinch? What? Is that another word for a way of saying... And I couldn't think of anything, and I was like, no, it's not. She was just pinched. On the arse. Goosed. And despite slapping the guy who did it, Egwene thinks Nynaeve did not look all that displeased. What? She didn't look too displeased. This is a lady who will rip your face from your skull for expressing a slightly differing opinion to her. But if you grope her without consent, she won't be too displeased. This is just wrong, and most likely a symptom of this being written by a bloke in the early 90s. And the second truly weird scene comes after our 3 heroines have just disembarked from a boat. They are walking along the shore, and an Aiel lady pops out of a bush like a Diglett. The Aiel are this sort of warrior nomad race from another part of the map. The lady says one of her friends is injured and asks for their help, and they agree, and so ensues what in any other story would be played as light-hearted and comedic. It's your classic sort of culture shock conversation. Oh my god, I can't believe your culture does that. Oh my god, I can't believe your culture doesn't do this. And so on and so forth. But as this is happening, that injured friend is just bleeding out on the floor, and everyone is sort of edgy and their hands are hovering over their swords. The tone was just so all over the place. I was glad when it ended. Tone is one issue with Robert Jordan's writing, but I have found a bigger one. Overall, his writing is brilliant. He gets across emotion, fear, sadness, and anger with a real vivid strength. And his descriptions of the more fantastical locations especially are top class. The world he has created is now prying itself away from the Middle-earth analog it had started as, becoming well and truly its own thing. And the dialogue can be snappy and genuinely funny when it wants to be. But he is just so repetitive. And I'm not just talking plot information. I'm an idiot. There are all these people and places and things with fantasy names, and they're all intersecting all over the place. So I need the plot hammered home, especially going into it essentially blind like I am here. It's his repetition of character traits that really got under my skin. Nynaeve has long dark hair tied into a long braid, and she has a habit of tugging on it. And I am surprised she is not completely bald by the end of things, the amount she pulls her own hair. It is absurd. The Amaryllis Seat, the head of the Magic Academy, grew up in a fishing village, and there is not a single interaction with her that goes by in which she doesn't drop some kind of fish or water or fishing-based analogy. We get it. You know fish. shut up. It gets so bad that I'm starting to think she is lying about her upbringing. Like, you know, when people lie, they sort of overcompensate in the wrong direction. It's kind of like that. Something else that Robert Jordan repeats? M dashes, but only for a bit. That's this punctuation. It's longer than a hyphen and floats above an underscore. It's used to indicate a pause or a break in dialogue or narration that's sort of sharper and more sudden than a comma. Now, I'm not Cormac McCarthy. I don't hate M dashes. It's just Robert Jordan used them sparingly until we got to chapter 47, after which they're everywhere. Seriously, there are 60 in just 22 pages. 60! You don't normally see 60 M dashes in an entire book. It's like he just discovered them and is trying to use them wherever he can, or he's got like a bet on or something. Imagine how repetitive the use of a piece of punctuation has to be for you to even notice it. Lights on. More on repetition. There is something in these books that I can only describe as a running gag. Our three boys, Rand, Matt and Perrin, whenever they're in a situation that involves talking to girls, each will wish that they are the other two. E.g., Matt will think something like, oh, I wish I was Rand or Perrin right now. They were always so good at talking to girls. And then like vice versa. So it's this cute little triangle of three boys, none of whom are actually that good at talking to girls. And that's totally fine to have in the first book when everything is quaint and low key. Having it continue into this book is just ridiculous. Perrin wishes he was Matt or Rand, does he? Well, Matt's in a coma and is about to die after having his soul torn to shreds by an ancient evil dagger. And Rand has a destiny that will see him go insane and tear the world apart. A destiny that has turned him into the biggest wet wipe alive. Nah, but go ahead, man. I bet their Riz games are still on point. That's all I have to say about the book. Definitely long thoughts on the book. I liked it a lot more than the first two. Still not a 10 on 10. Right, let's see how it accommodates a moron intentionally going in blind. Well, as it turns out, quite well indeed. There is a prologue told from the perspective of a tertiary. There is a prologue told from a tertiary side character. George R.R. Martin must have copied some notes there. And it does a really good job of summarizing the events of the previous book, especially the events of the climax. Obviously, if you were going in like fully blind, like starting the whole series, the third book for some reason, none of it would make sense to you. But if you have read the first two, even if that was a while ago, the prologue does jog your memory and you're going, oh yeah, I do remember that happening. And it's not too janky or unnatural either. It's not just like a block of internal monologue or exposition. I mean, there is a bit of that, but the information is mostly relayed to you in a smooth, seamless way. I'd say it's about as close as possible to showing overtelling without actually showing. As we progress through the first few chapters, Perrin's wolf-based powers are reintroduced in a pretty epic way. Ogiers are re-highlighted as one of the fantasy races that inhabit this world, as are the prophetic powers of one of the other characters. Rand, as I mentioned earlier, is a giant baby man. I could not have possibly forgotten that. It was basically the entire premise of the video covering the second book. But just in case you had forgotten that, he picks right back up being a giant baby man. The only real issue I had through the start of the book and even towards the end was locations. I'm talking place names, I'm talking where places are in relation to each other, I'm talking where characters physically are, I'm talking where characters physically are in relation to each other, and I'm talking how those characters ended up there and what they did to end up there. It's all a little hard to follow. Giving anything a name that isn't just like standard English words automatically adds a layer of difficulty when it comes to keeping track of everything. And this is where I think A Song of Ice and Fire really excels and makes it so accessible. What may seem like a lack of creativity or flair actually makes things so much easier to digest and understand. The North, the Westerlands, I wonder where they are. Unfortunately, The Wheel of Time is far from that simple. And stumbling into this book in the way I have has only made that lack of simplicity even starker. I don't know where Shinar is in relation to Andor. I don't know where Caerhine is in relation to Tarabon. And I'm not saying don't go making fantastical names for things. I'm just saying don't do that and then chuck them all at your reader at once by having all your characters scattered all over the place, crisscrossing from one fantastically named place to another, crisscrossing from starting points I could never really remember how or why we ended up at. There were a few times where I thought bits of dramatic irony were being set up, with characters sort of passing each other out in the world like ships in the night, but with us as the reader knowing they're agonizingly close to each other. But that kind of relies on you knowing where everyone and everything is. And as I think I've made clear now, that's not so well communicated. Fortunately for all these location-based issues, there is a map at the beginning of the book. I love a map, but constantly referring to one as I'm reading feels like I'm going through some kind of military-style orienteering exercise. It is not ideal. That really was the only big issue that got me lost though, the locations. Everything else was pretty well communicated and well reintroduced. Oh, except Tom. I thought he had died in the last book and his reintroduction here was like a big deal, but that isn't what happened. He had a death fake out in the first book and then showed back up in the second book in a manner not too dissimilar to the way he shows back up in this book. Sort of confusing diminishing returns for old Jariah the Gallant here. So yeah, you can go into this third book with multiple years having passed since reading the second. The story and the characters are presented in a way that jogs your memory enough to get back into the flow of things with minimal effort. Between the prologue and the smooth reintroduction of important elements, you should not be too confused or too lost. And by about a third of the way through, you should be well and truly in the world again. I would say though, if you are planning on doing what I just did, make sure your copy of The Dragon Reborn has a map. Hello, thanks a lot for getting to the end of the video. Like and subscribe. Next video I think might be another fridge one. They've thrown a sort of fun spanner in the schedule, in the rota, but I quite enjoy making them. So, well, I say them, I've only made one at this point. I've got a good idea for another one. Plus, sort of adding an extra week gives me, or 2 weeks actually, gives me time to read longer books. Like this one. It's a longer book. I will see you then.